Let me turn to some of the specific questions the board asked. With respect to what is the source of the fast-moving plume of radioactive contamination that could threaten the Bass Islands group's sole source aquifer, I'm not sure what exactly that's referring to. Certainly with respect to the analysis that was done previously, the source is the liquid rad waste tank in the rad waste building with the largest volume. As I said, you're taking that entire source term of that tank and inserting it instantaneously into the groundwater, a highly conservative and unrealistic postulate simply for analysis purposes. But that perhaps is what is being referred to here as the source of the radioactive contamination.
If this was released inside the facility, what would have to happen in order for the release to get outside of the facility?
A couple of things would have to happen. First, you would have to have a failure of the proposed mitigation, the steel liner and the concrete structure, which is not assumed and does not need to be assumed. But beyond that, you would also have to have some sort of crack that allows the groundwater to come into the tank, because the pressure is the pressure flow of the water is into the facility. So nothing can escape until the groundwater actually goes in and fills the volume of the vault and equalizes the pressure, and then you can start to have a flow out. None of that can happen instantaneously the way it's actually modeled in this analysis, or it's assumed in the analysis. So to answer your question, you have to have some sort of breach of the containment, and then you have to have the groundwater flow in before it can flow out.
Is there any information to suggest that the Bass Island aquifer beneath the facility and the Bass Island group as a sole source aquifer on the islands are part of different hydrogeologic systems?
No is the answer.
As to this letter we've just seen, and you may have just seen for the first time, you have a position on whether we should make consideration. It's not even clear to me about.
Yeah, I think I have to object to this because I obviously have not had a chance to look at it or consider it, and I think there have been several opportunities to submit it previously.
Very well. Anything further from the applicant?
No.
The staff, Ms. Simon, first can you tell us what your position is on this letter before we move on to it?
I think we would have the same position as the applicant.
Okay, very well. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The contention as it was previously framed.
Well, as we stated in our answer, the staff's position is that a portion of this contention alleging the omission of certain on-site measurements is admissible as a contention of omission, with the remainder being inadmissible, as we discussed, for lack of adequate support and lack of raising a genuine dispute. With regard to the petitioner's reply, the petitioners have added additional support for the assertions regarding interconnection and possible contamination of aquifers and for the effects of chelating agents. Much of this additional material consists of citations from the environmental report as well as some external documents that were not provided originally. As you may recall, the original petition relied almost exclusively on RAIs and RAI responses as support. So as set forth in the Commission's decision in Palisades, technically the submission of all these additional documents in a reply is not allowed. It's outside the scope of a permissible reply. In that decision, the Commission said you cannot add new bases for a contention in a reply, nor can you add additional documentary support if the documentary support provided initially was inadequate. Furthermore, the petitioners have really not explained how these documents...
Since you haven't given, I don't think you give...
Oh, citation, I'm sorry. Yeah. CLI 0617, and that's 63 NRC 727 at page 732.
Go ahead.
The petitioners have not really explained how these documents apply specifically to Fermi 3 and their contention. For instance, the paper on microbial contaminants that were mentioned, that actually has to do with the South Bass Island, which is not Catawba Island. It's a distinct, separate island, and so that's really not relevant. And The paper, the K-dry paper on decontamination was based on a demonstration project from the Dresden unit done in the early 80s. So again, we don't feel that the reply has added sufficient support or raised a genuine dispute. The petitioners have cited a number of sections of the environmental report, but they really haven't raised a dispute with them. They've actually used them as support for their contention.
What about Mr., if I could maybe somewhat oversimplify Mr. Repka's response, but it seemed to be essentially that the analysis that was done that the petitioners are referring to is in effect kind of red herring, and they've covered the problem the petitioners are concerned with in the design of the facility, which we can't really get into in this contention. I take it there's some, you may have some disagreement with that, if
Yeah, well,
you think some part of the
can-
contention is admissible.
I can explain it that in the staff standard review plan in New Reg 0800 in section 2.4.13 where this analysis is discussed, there are two ways that the staff can make an acceptable finding. The first is to review the calculations and find that there were no instances where the Part 20 regulations regarding effluents were exceeded. The other way, as Mr. Repka alluded to, is that if special design features are incorporated to mitigate the possibility of an accident, then the staff can make a finding that those provisions are acceptable to mitigate the failure. But at this point, the staff has not completed its analysis, and we really feel that that goes to the merits. We feel that based on the legal basis for a contention of omission, that a contention of omission has been stated.
This seems to get into this rather difficult, sometimes difficult question of what exactly is covered in the design certification and what isn't. If the design is in fact certified, will it sounds like the issue you're getting at is one that's more site-specific than that would be covered in the design rulemaking, but maybe I'm wrong about that. That is, whether the design here is adequate to address the possible off-site migration hydrologic deficiency issue.
Well, once the design is certified, then perhaps...
Would it be certified to, in effect, say, this design is sufficient to prevent off-site migration at any site, regardless of its geology?
I'm not certain. I believe that would be the case, but I'm not completely sure. With regard to the board's question regarding the fast-moving plume, the staff was not aware of any fast-moving plume, and with respect to the petitioner's discussion, it seems clear that what they're referring to is the possible plume that could result from possible spills and leaks and possible combinations of chelating agents. I think we've discussed that sufficiently in our answer.
One quick question. The parts that were missing from the application were measurements of absorption and retention coefficients. Under 10 CFR 120C3, what significance would any new data that would come back from measurements have on anything that we're discussing right now?
Well, as Mr. Repka stated, there's an analysis is done using those parameters, and by the way, porosity was also a measurement.
But I don't think that's in the regulation. That's fine.
Well, it says such as. It's not limited. But in any case, so that when as Mr. Repka stated, the applicant used conservative values. And
basically, no retention is what they used.
Right.
So
okay.
No
so I guess you have.
Is there any potential adverse impacts from any measurements that could be presented?
If they assume no retention at all, then I guess there isn't.